the lake always had a way of keeping secrets. Its waters were still most mornings, catching the glow of the sunrise like polished glass, only breaking when the breeze rippled across the surface or a fish leapt in the distance. For Daniel Hayes, this cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was a piece of his family's story, handed down through generations, a quiet refuge where the world's noise couldn't reach him. Every summer since he was a boy, Daniel had walked the same gravel path down to the dock, barefoot, listening to the crunch of pebbles beneath him. The cabin had survived storms, floods, and time itself. When Daniel's father passed, it became his responsibility, not just to maintain it, but to preserve its peace. That peace, however, was being tested. For years, the neighborhood across the ridge had been managed by an HOA, a group of people who believed order came from control. At the head of that HOA stood Linda Prescott, known in whispers as Linda the Rulebook. She wielded the HOA bylaws like weapons, finding flaws in everyone's lives, forcing them into compliance. The problem was, she didn't have authority over Daniel's cabin. But Linda believed she did. It started small. One afternoon Daniel returned from fishing to find a paper pinned to his cabin door. A violation notice. According to Linda, his dock was an unauthorized extension into community waters. The irony. The cabin sat firmly on private land, predating the HOA by decades. The lake wasn't under their jurisdiction at all. Daniel chuckled at first, thinking it was a mistake. He tossed the notice in a drawer. But the notices didn't stop. They multiplied. One about the color of his cabin shutters. Another about a fire hazard from his stone fire pit. Then came the fines, outrageous amounts demanding thousands of dollars. At first, Daniel ignored them. But Linda wasn't the type to be ignored. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Linda appeared on his porch. No knocking. No courtesy. Just a sharp voice breaking the quiet. "Daniel Hayes," she barked, hands on her hips. "You've ignored every notice I've sent. Do you think you're above the rules?" Daniel set down his coffee mug and opened the door slowly. "Linda, this is private property. Your HOA doesn't govern anything here." Linda scoffed. "The lake is community land. And that dock of yours? It violates our standards. If you don't remove it, I'll have no choice but to escalate this legally." Daniel crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "That dock was built by my grandfather. This cabin existed before your subdivision even broke ground. Your authority ends at the ridge." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Daniel saw the gleam of someone who thrived on control. She didn't want an explanation. She wanted obedience. "You'll regret defying me," she hissed, turning sharply and stomping back to her SUV. Gravel spit from her tires as she sped away. That was the moment Daniel realized this wouldn't just blow over. Linda wasn't going to stop. The following weeks became a siege. First came the letters. Envelopes stuffed into his mailbox almost daily, each with more demands, fines, and threats of legal action. Then came the phone calls, anonymous, late at night, accusing him of being a bad neighbor. At the grocery store, Daniel overheard whispers. "He's the guy fighting the HOA. Did you hear he refused to pay?" Linda had been busy. She twisted the story, painting Daniel as a selfish rule-breaker who refused to respect the community. One evening, Daniel attended a town meeting, only to find Linda standing at the podium with a projector screen behind her. She pointed to pictures of his cabin, his dock, even his fire pit. "This," she declared dramatically, "is the kind of negligence destroying our property values. If we don't hold him accountable, what kind of neighborhood will we become?" A murmur spread through the room. Some nodded. Others frowned. Daniel raised his hand, but Linda cut him off. "You've had your chance to comply. This community won't tolerate freeloaders." Daniel clenched his jaw. It wasn't just about a dock anymore. Linda was trying to ruin his reputation, to isolate him until he caved. But instead of breaking, Daniel grew more determined. Late one night, Daniel sat at his cabin table surrounded by stacks of old maps, land deeds, and survey reports. His grandfather had kept everything meticulously filed, and now it was Daniel's turn to fight not with anger, but with facts. What he found was undeniable: his land, including the section of lake his dock sat on, was legally exempt from the HOA's authority. He had centuries of documentation to prove it. But he knew Linda wouldn't be swayed by paperwork. She thrived on intimidation, not truth. So Daniel made a decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had quietly researched, the office of the state attorney general. To his surprise, the attorney general himself agreed to meet. He had heard of Linda Prescott and her HOA before. Daniel wasn't the first victim of her overreach. They scheduled a private meeting at Daniel's cabin. Daniel smiled to himself. The same place Linda had stormed into so many times uninvited would now become the place she'd face consequences. As the meeting date drew closer, Linda's behavior escalated. One night, Daniel heard footsteps outside his cabin. When he opened the door, Linda stood there, flashlight in hand, snapping photos of his porch. "What do you think you're doing?" Daniel demanded. "Gathering evidence," she said coldly. "Every violation you've ignored will be documented." Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. "You're trespassing. Leave, Linda. Now." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She hesitated, then stormed off, muttering threats as she disappeared into the night. The neighbors were starting to notice too. A few approached Daniel privately, admitting they felt pressured by Linda, that they never believed her stories but were too afraid to speak out. The cracks in her power were forming. And Daniel knew the final blow was coming. It was a Tuesday morning when everything came to a head. Daniel had just finished brewing coffee when he heard the crunch of tires on his gravel drive. Linda's SUV. He almost laughed, her timing couldn't have been more perfect. Inside the cabin, at the wooden dining table, sat the state attorney general, reviewing documents Daniel had provided. The door burst open without a knock. Linda stormed in, waving a stack of papers. "That's it, Hayes," she shouted. "You've ignored your last warning. I'm filing liens against your property. You're finished." She froze. The man at the table looked up calmly, adjusting his glasses. "And who might you be?" Linda stammered, her bravado faltering. I'm the HOA president. And this man is in violation of." The attorney general stood, towering over her. His voice was steady, firm, undeniable. "Ma'am, I am the state attorney general. And from what I see, the only one in violation of the law here is you." Silence. Linda's face drained of color. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching her crumble. The following weeks unraveled quickly for Linda. Investigations opened into her misuse of HOA funds, her harassment of residents, and her attempts to exert power she never legally had. Neighbors who once stayed silent began speaking out, sharing their own stories of intimidation. With the attorney general involved, they finally felt safe to tell the truth. At the next community gathering, Linda was absent. For the first time, the room felt lighter. People turned to Daniel, thanking him for standing his ground. One elderly neighbor clasped his hand and said softly, "You didn't just protect your cabin, you freed all of us." That night, Daniel sat on his dock, the lake shimmering beneath the stars. The cabin was quiet again, the way his grandfather had loved it. He thought about how easily fear can spread when someone abuses power, and how one act of courage can break its hold. The water lapped gently against the wood, carrying the promise of peace. For the first time in months, Daniel smiled without worry. The lake had kept its secrets long enough. Now, it held something new, justice.